For nearly 2 decades, Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban looked rock solid, like Hollywood's living, breathing proof that real love could actually survive the spotlight. They smiled on every red carpet, had each other's backs at every awards show, and low-key convinced millions of people that, yeah, maybe fairy tales weren't totally fake after all. But this year, everything flipped, and it started with one quiet move nobody saw coming. No statements. No drama. Just silence. And suddenly, that dream everyone believed in started cracking. The couple who once defined loyalty and forever was suddenly walking separate paths. Fans everywhere were asking the same thing: why now? What went down behind those picture-perfect smiles? And what truth was Nicole holding close while the cameras kept flashing like nothing was wrong? Because what happened wasn't just a breakup, it was something deeper falling apart. So before you scroll off, hit that subscribe button real quick, because the truth behind this love story is one you're gonna want to see all the way through. And to understand how it all fell apart, we've got to rewind to where it really began. Two worlds collide: Nicole's rise, Keith's struggle. Long before Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban became Hollywood's it couple, their worlds were totally different vibes. Nicole's rise to fame was built on discipline, patience, and quiet intensity. From her early days in Sydney's community theatre, she carried herself with purpose way beyond her years. She wasn't the loudest kid in the room or the most confident, but she had something stronger: focus. Acting wasn't just a hobby for her, it was her lifeline. By 16, she was already landing roles in Australian films, and not long after, the rest of the world started paying attention. Nicole didn't blow up overnight in Hollywood, she earned every step. Each role stacked on the last, slowly turning a shy teenager into one of the most respected actresses of her generation. Movies like Dead Calm and Days of Thunder didn't just make her famous, they showed her range. She could make fragility feel powerful and silence hit harder than words. By the time she won her Oscar for The Hours, Nicole wasn't just a movie star. She was an institution, polished, composed, and always in control. But that control came with a price. Early fame taught her to guard her emotions like armor. Behind all that grace and professionalism was a woman who learned early on that vulnerability in Hollywood could be seen as weakness. She moved like a fortress, stunning, steady, and hard to reach. Keith Urban's world. Completely different story. Born in New Zealand and raised in Australia, he didn't grow up under bright lights or fancy premieres. His stages were cramped bars and smoky pubs, where the crowd was sometimes louder than the music. He wasn't handed success, he hustled for it, one chord at a time. Music wasn't just passion, it was survival. From the moment he picked up a guitar at 6 years old, Keith knew this was it for him. But along with that gift came demons, self-doubt, pressure, and a growing dependence on alcohol and drugs that followed him into adulthood. His early career was messy, flashes of brilliance mixed with real pain. One night he'd win over a crowd, the next he'd lose himself completely. Even when his songs started topping charts in Nashville, he still wondered if he could keep it together long enough to deserve it. Fame only made everything louder: the applause, the expectations, the loneliness. His career was taking off, but his personal life felt like chaos he couldn't shut down. Then came Nicole, calm, polished, and everything he wasn't. She built her life on structure and self-control. He built his on rhythm and rebellion. On paper, it didn't make sense at all. She was Hollywood's refined leading lady. He was country music's charming outlaw. But somehow, their differences clicked. Nicole was drawn to his rawness, the honesty in his voice, the real emotion in his lyrics. Keith saw in her something grounding, something that could quiet the noise in his head. She felt like balance. Safety. Grace. To him, Nicole was the calm he'd been chasing forever. And to her, Keith was proof that life didn't always need to be perfectly controlled, that a little chaos could actually feel freeing. But love built on opposites always walks a thin line. Their connection was electric, but fragile. She had mastered restraint. He was still learning how to hold himself together. There was laughter and passion, sure, but also an unspoken tension. One was always trying to hold on, while the other was trying not to fall apart. From the outside, it looked like a fairy tale, two stars from totally different worlds making it work. But underneath, those differences weren't just cute contrasts. They were warning signs. Even back then, before the red carpets, before their names were fused together, the signs were there. Her calm brushing against his chaos. Her discipline clashing with his unpredictability. They were drawn together by everything that made them different. And over time, those same differences would test them the hardest. Because sometimes, when two worlds collide, they don't shatter right away. They just start a countdown. Their love story had already begun. And somewhere between passion and pressure, art and addiction, Hollywood lights and Nashville nights, the ending was quietly being written between the lines. 3. The first encounter, sparks hidden beneath the spotlight. Their first meeting didn't scream romance, but fate clearly had other plans. It was January 2005, and Los Angeles was buzzing during the annual G'day USA Gala, an event celebrating Australian excellence in Hollywood. Cameras flashed, laughter filled the ballroom, and the industry's biggest names all packed into one room. And that night, two people who had no idea how much they'd change each other's lives crossed paths for the first time, Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban. Nicole, already an Oscar winner and global icon, moved with effortless grace. She was glowing, composed, and surrounded by admirers who saw her as pure elegance. Her career was peaking, her reputation solid, and her attention focused on her work and her two young kids. Romance? Not really on her mind. After years of public heartbreak, she'd learned to protect her peace. Across the room was Keith Urban, charming, good-looking, and still making his mark in the American country scene. To Hollywood's elite, he wasn't a household name yet. No Oscars. No blockbuster films. But he had something else, authenticity. The kind that made people stop and really listen. That night, though, he wasn't performing. He was just another guest, trying not to stick out. When Keith first saw Nicole, he was instantly hooked. But he didn't approach her. Maybe nerves. Maybe he figured someone like Nicole Kidman wouldn't even notice someone like him. She was Hollywood royalty. He was still proving himself in Nashville. So he stayed quiet, watching from afar, thinking the moment had already passed. Nicole noticed him too, but she completely misread the silence. She would later admit that she genuinely believed Keith just wasn't into her. From her point of view, his calm, laid-back vibe felt less like mystery and more like straight-up indifference. She smiled, kept it polite, exchanged a few words, and when he didn't circle back or make a move, she basically shrugged and moved on. Back to her world, scripts, shoots, exhausting filming days, rinse and repeat. What neither of them realized that night, though, was that their story had already kicked off, not with big gestures, dramatic sparks, or instant fireworks, but with hesitation. And honestly, maybe that's exactly what set it apart from every Hollywood romance that came before it. Months went by, and Nicole figured that brief encounter would just fade into the background of her memory. Then, completely out of nowhere, her phone rang. It was Keith. He'd waited 4 long months before finally dialing her number, 4 months of overthinking, second-guessing, and wrestling with the idea until he realized he couldn't just let that moment slip away. When Nicole answered, something about the sound of her voice instantly reassured him that he'd made the right call. Those first conversations weren't about fame, red carpets, or careers. They talked about simple, real stuff, family, fears, music, and childhood memories growing up in Australia. It was a slow emotional burn, not some flashy spark, the kind that doesn't explode right away, but quietly builds until you can't ignore it anymore. They weren't two celebrities chasing headlines. They were just two people, a little bruised by life, looking for something genuine. Nicole was drawn to his honesty. Keith wasn't trying to act perfect or put on a front. He openly talked about his struggles, his deep love for music, and his ongoing fight to stay grounded. In a world where everyone wears a mask, Keith was disarmingly real. For Nicole, who'd spent years surrounded by cameras, expectations, and pressure, that sincerity felt like a breath of fresh air. Keith, on the other hand, was completely taken by her calm presence. She had a steadiness he didn't, a quiet strength that made him want to level up and be better. When they finally saw each other again, there was no dramatic movie-style moment. No sweeping kiss, no cinematic fireworks. Just a feeling, subtle, undeniable, and real. It wasn't love at first sight, but maybe that's exactly why it lasted as long as it did. Because when two souls connect through silence instead of spectacle, something deeper starts to grow, something not built on fame, but on a quiet understanding that neither of them was perfect, yet both were willing to try. And the moment he finally picked up that phone, everything shifted. For the fairy tale begins, fame meets fragility. When Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban reconnected for real, the timing felt almost unreal, like two parallel lines finally crossing after years apart. Their love story unfolded fast, almost breathless. By the time 2006 rolled around, they were inseparable. Hollywood called it a match made in heaven. The elegant movie star and the soulful musician, both Australian, both survivors of heartbreak. And for a moment, it honestly looked like destiny had finally gotten something right. Their wedding was intimate, but still glamorous, set in Sydney, Australia. Nicole wore a simple ivory gown, and Keith looked at her like time had stopped. To fans, it was pure hope, proof that real love could still exist in an industry built on illusions. But behind the smiles and glowing headlines, neither of them knew their fairy tale was about to be tested by something very real and very fragile. Keith had been upfront from the beginning about his struggles. Fame had given him everything, and taken just as much. He'd spent years battling addiction, trying to stay clean, and fighting to break free from a cycle that had almost destroyed him. According to the Los Angeles Times, October 21, 2006, Urban checked himself into a rehabilitation center just months after marrying Nicole Kidman, openly acknowledging he was seeking treatment for alcohol dependence. Nicole, who had seen loved ones crumble under pressure and loss, was drawn to that vulnerability. She didn't see a lost cause, she saw a man worth fighting for. Not because he needed her, but because she believed in a love that could heal. Just months after their wedding, Keith entered rehab. The news stunned everyone. How could newlyweds already be dealing with something this heavy? But Nicole didn't bounce, she stayed. Later reports revealed she had quietly staged an intervention, pushing him to get help before it was too late. Keith would later credit her with helping him find the strength to face his demons head-on. To the outside world, it looked like pure devotion, a woman standing by her man through pain and recovery. But behind closed doors, it was a constant tug-of-war between love and exhaustion. Keith's addiction didn't just challenge his career, it tested their trust. There were cycles of relapse, recovery, and relapse again. Nicole's life, once filled with premieres, scripts, and composure, now revolved around late-night calls, therapy appointments, and the daily fear of whether the man she loved would stay sober. Still, she stayed. And her patience became the backbone of their marriage. Keith poured his gratitude into music. His songs turned into love letters to Nicole, apologies, promises, confessions hidden in melodies. On stage, he smiled for the crowd. Backstage, he fought to stay grounded. Every performance was both a win and a test. For a while, it felt like they'd found their rhythm again. Nicole leaned into her career, earning praise for Moulin Rouge and The Hours, while Keith dominated the country charts. Their red carpet moments looked effortless, interviews painted them as the couple who'd survived every storm. But what cameras couldn't capture was the invisible weight, the emotional cost of constantly saving someone you love without losing yourself in the process. Every fairytale has a quiet fragility, the part nobody likes to talk about. For Nicole, that fragility started whispering in the background. Long tours, time apart, the unspoken tension between his world and hers. It all started piling up. They weren't just juggling two careers, they were living two separate lives, and sometimes love alone couldn't keep them aligned. Still, in those early years, their love was undeniable. Flawed but fearless. Imperfect but real. They built a home, welcomed two daughters, and shared moments of joy that felt rare and fragile at the same time. Through it all, Nicole kept believing in him, even when the world doubted his sobriety, even when exhaustion whispered that love might not be enough. For Nicole Kidman, love was never about perfection. It was about endurance. About holding on when every instinct tells you to let go. But even endurance has its breaking point. The fairytale that began with a wedding in Sydney would eventually turn into a story of distance, not just physical, but emotional. Because even the strongest love can crack under the quiet weight of survival. And though no one realized it back then, the first cracks were already there, small, silent, hidden beneath the shine of fame. And when he picked up that phone years earlier, neither of them could have imagined where that call would lead, to love, redemption, and, eventually, heartbreak. Quick pause, before we go any further, if you're still watching, that means this story hit something real for you. So take a second and tap that like button, it seriously helps more people find stories like this. 5. Behind the glamour, the hidden cracks. For years, Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban looked flawless. Every red carpet appearance glowed, every interview was filled with laughter and soft looks. To the world, they seemed rock solid, the Hollywood actress and the country star who beat the odds. But when the flashbulbs faded and the noise died down, the cracks that had always existed started to spread. What people saw was beauty and stability. What they didn't see was exhaustion, silence, and the slow unraveling of two people fighting to hold onto something slipping through their fingers. By the early 2010s, both were at the peak of their careers. Nicole was taking on more ambitious roles, projects that demanded emotional depth, and months of filming overseas. Productions like The Paperboy, The Undoing, and Big Little Lies required not just time, but total immersion. Acting for Nicole was never just a job, it was a full-on transformation. Every role pulled her in deep, like it took over her whole soul. Keith, meanwhile, was out here living that non-stop road life, endless tours, interviews, studio time, and fan meetups that had him gone for weeks on end. Their schedules were straight chaos, one planted in Hollywood, the other rooted in Nashville, both chasing greatness, while trying their best to actually show up for their two daughters. But even real love, no matter how strong, can start to crack when distance weighs it down. The couple who once couldn't stand being apart slowly started living side-by-side lives instead of together ones. Calls got shorter, texts came less often, and when they finally did reunite, exhaustion usually killed the vibe. Then there was that shadow Keith had been dealing with for most of his adult life, addiction. Even though he'd been sober for years, the temptation and pressure never fully dipped. Staying relevant in the music industry, the loneliness of touring, and non-stop public scrutiny all mixed into a perfect storm. There were whispers, nothing confirmed, but loud enough, that Keith might be struggling again behind closed doors. Nicole, who had always been his anchor, felt that old fear creeping back in, the fear of watching someone you love slowly slip away. Friends close to them supposedly noticed the shift. Their once electric chemistry started looking more like a routine. Nicole leaned harder into her work, and Keith drowned himself in music. To fans, it was easy to miss. They smiled for cameras, gave sweet interviews, and posted little family moments that looked picture perfect. But anyone paying real attention could feel something was off, a stiffness in their body language, a distance in their eyes. Behind closed doors, there were disagreements, not loud blow-ups, but quiet frustrations that cut deeper. Nicole, the planner and perfectionist, craved structure and calm. Keith, a true artist at heart, lived on impulse and emotion. What once felt like a cute contrast slowly turned into friction. She wanted security, he wanted freedom. And little by little, the love that once felt healing started feeling heavy for both of them. Still, neither was ready to quit. They'd built a life, a family, and a reputation as one of Hollywood's longest-lasting couples. Letting that fall apart meant facing heartbreak and public judgment, something neither wanted their daughters dragged into. So they pushed through. They smiled at events, celebrated anniversaries, and dropped the occasional loving post online. But beneath every photo and caption, the truth sat quietly, waiting. Nicole began pouring her emotions into her work. Her performances got deeper, more raw, like her characters were saying the things she couldn't. Critics called it growth, maybe it was pain. Keith's music shifted too, lyrics filled with regret, longing, and love that hurts, but refuses to die. To fans, it was just art. To those close to them, it was a signal. Their lives, once perfectly synced, were now moving at totally different speeds. And when two people grow in opposite directions, even love can start to feel like a burden. What once bonded them, their shared ambition, had become the thing pulling them apart. On the surface, Nicole and Keith still looked like that dream couple fans adored. But behind the glam, they were living in two totally different worlds, one shaped by silence, the other by sound. She searched for peace, he searched for release. And sometimes, that's all it takes for a marriage to quietly start falling apart, not cheating, not rage, just the slow fade of connection. As the spotlight stayed bright, the shadows behind them grew darker. And soon, people started noticing the smiles didn't hit the same, that the perfect picture was slowly losing color. But the loudest sign wasn't what they said, it was what they stopped saying. And in 2023, that silence spoke louder than words ever could. 2023, the year of silence and secrets. By the time 2023 rolled in, something about Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban felt off. To outsiders, it was subtle, a skipped red carpet here, a quiet holiday post there. But longtime fans felt it instantly. The warmth was gone, the smiles felt forced, and the togetherness that once defined them had quietly faded into separate lives. They hadn't been seen together in months. At first, tabloids blamed work. Nicole was filming a new limited series, and Keith was knee-deep in a world tour grind. But then came the silence, no anniversary post, no public appearances, no shared interviews. The couple once known for PDA had basically vanished. And in Hollywood, silence usually means something's wrong. Behind the scenes, rumors popped off. Some said Keith had moved out of their Nashville home and into a nearby place. Others whispered that the separation had been quietly happening long before anyone caught on. Still, neither confirmed a thing. Nicole stayed locked in on her projects, calm and composed, while Keith poured his emotions into his performances. At one concert, Keith reportedly tweaked the lyrics of an old love song, just one word changed, but enough to send fans spiraling. The internet went wild. Was it a message to Nicole? A soft goodbye? The clip spread fast, and suddenly every look, every move, every song choice was being analyzed like a crime scene. Around the same time, Nicole was spotted alone in Los Angeles, dressed low-key, no wedding ring. Paparazzi caught her heading to her car, looking distant but peaceful. The photo blew up online, not because of what she did, but because of what she didn't do. No statement. No denial. No act. Just silence. And that silence said everything. Hollywood insiders claimed the couple had been living separate lives most of the year, each buried in their own responsibilities. Nicole spent months filming overseas, while Keith's tour schedule left zero space for home life. Even when their paths crossed, friends noticed the emotional gap, polite, but not close. Still, neither wanted to be the one to make it official. Nearly 2 decades together meant history, family, fans, and daughters to think about. Ending things publicly wasn't just emotional, it was strategic. But by mid-2023, the truth couldn't stay hidden. The last red carpet they attended together told the story without words. They arrived separately, smiled for photos, and left quietly. Close enough to look united, far enough to show something had broken. Then came the biggest sign, Keith skipping a major event honoring Nicole's career. It wasn't just noticeable, it was loud. The man who once never missed her milestones was suddenly absent. Soon after, reports surfaced that Nicole had spent most of the year in Los Angeles, while Keith settled full-time in Nashville. Fans connected the dots. Something had ended, not suddenly, but slowly, like a candle burning out. Online theories exploded. Some blamed careers pulling them apart. Others pointed to unresolved struggles, old wounds from Keith's past creeping back in. Through it all, Nicole stayed silent. She gave no interviews about her personal life. She smiled for cameras, talked passionately about her work, and carried herself with that same quiet grace. But beneath it was a woman who knew how to survive loss without making noise. She'd been there before, and here she was again. Keith, meanwhile, kept performing, but something in his music wasn't the same anymore. His voice carried a whole different kind of ache, not loud, not dramatic, just softer, heavier, and way more reflective. He didn't even have to say anything out loud, the pain was baked into every single note. By late 2023, the truth was pretty obvious, even without some big official announcement, Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban were no longer together. The quiet between them had gotten so loud it said more than any statement ever could. And while headlines kept spinning theories non-stop, only the two of them actually knew what went down, the long, sleepless nights, the low-key goodbyes, and that one moment when they both realized that love, no matter how deep it runs, sometimes just hits a dead end. This wasn't about scandal. It wasn't about cheating. It was the slow, painful unraveling of two people who once fought like hell to save each other, and were now learning how to let go. The fairy tale didn't crash and burn in one dramatic moment. It didn't explode. It just faded, quietly, gracefully, without any kind of spectacle, until there was nothing left to cover up. And soon enough, the world was finally going to hear the truth they'd both been trying to protect. The divorce, a love story, officially ends. When the news finally dropped, it didn't come from some emotional sit-down interview or a blurry paparazzi photo. Nope. It came from a simple court filing. According to People, Nicole Kidman officially filed for divorce from Keith Urban after 19 years of marriage. The headline was basic, almost cold, but to millions of fans, it hit like a shockwave. Reports said Nicole cited irreconcilable differences. No scandal. No ugly money fight. No explosive accusations. Just the quiet, legal language of an ending. And still, even in its simplicity, the heartbreak was heavy. They had spent nearly 2 decades together, built a home, raised 2 daughters, and weathered storms that would have wrecked most couples. But this time, there was no comeback, no fixing it, no last-minute miracle. It was done. Court documents later confirmed by People made the story feel even more real and human. Nicole was listed as the primary residential parent, granted 306 days of custody a year, while Keith was allowed 59. It wasn't a fight, it was an agreement. The kind you only reach after months of quiet acceptance. Insiders called it amicable, but anyone who's ever loved hard knows no breakup is ever truly painless. The world was stunned. How does a couple that survived addiction, fame, long distance, and non-stop pressure finally fall apart after almost 20 years. Fans who had watched them grow together felt the heartbreak like it was personal. Social media blew up with throwback photos, the wedding, the red carpets, the anniversaries, paired with captions like "True love is dead," and "I really thought they'd make it." But if you looked closely, the signs were there the whole time. The anniversary post that never got a reply. The empty seat next to Nicole at award shows. The way Keith's lyrics had gotten heavier and more somber over the years. The silence didn't come out of nowhere. It was the sound of something ending long before anyone noticed. Nicole's close friends, speaking anonymously to entertainment outlets, described her as strong but tired. They said she tried everything: therapy, travel breaks, late-night heart-to-hearts, but the emotional distance just kept growing. For a woman who had already survived one very public divorce years earlier, walking away again wasn't a decision she took lightly. Keith wasn't doing great either. He reportedly moved into a separate house in Nashville before the paperwork was even filed. It wasn't fueled by anger, it was pure resignation. He poured his confusion and sadness into his music, hitting the stage night after night, trying to understand what slipped through his fingers. At one concert, fans swore they saw tears in his eyes during a love ballad he once dedicated to Nicole. Whether it was emotion or straight-up exhaustion, no one really knew, but something inside him had clearly shifted. Despite all the heartbreak, both of them stayed quiet publicly. No interviews. No finger-pointing. Just grace. They built their relationship in the spotlight, but they chose to end it with dignity. Nicole focused on her daughters and upcoming projects, while Keith disappeared into the comfort of his guitar and songwriting. To a lot of people, it felt strange, how two people who once seemed inseparable could split so quietly. But maybe that was the whole point. Their love had always been deeply personal, wrapped in layers of privacy. And when it ended, they protected that too. In an industry where celebrity breakups usually turn into messy chaos, Nicole and Keith chose silence, a rare kind of respect in a world that lives off exposure. No ugly accusations. No public drama. Just a final ending delivered with empathy. And still, even without fireworks, the heartbreak was real. They spent nearly 20 years proving love could survive anything, and in a way, it did. The marriage ended, but the story didn't. It became proof that sometimes even the strongest love stories need to close their last chapter, so both people can start new ones. While fans mourned the end of Hollywood's golden couple, neither Nicole nor Keith seemed bitter. They loved deeply, fought hard, and now, they were learning how to let go with grace. Still, one question kept buzzing in everyone's mind: why now? After everything they survived, what finally broke them? Because while the divorce papers told one version of the truth, what was underneath was way more complicated, a story of quiet pain, emotional distance, and secrets only they could ever fully understand. And soon enough, whispers started floating around about what really went wrong, the hidden battles, the loneliness, and the confessions that finally brought their story to a close. The dark side, what Nicole finally revealed. After the dust from the divorce papers settled, the headlines cooled off, and the world jumped to the next celebrity mess. Nicole Kidman stayed silent, like she always did. But the people closest to her say that silence wasn't empty, it was armor. For almost 2 decades, she carried the weight of a love story that looked flawless on camera, but often left her feeling invisible behind closed doors. And now, for the first time, pieces of the truth started slipping out, not through interviews or tabloids, but through subtle hints of what she'd quietly endured. Sources close to Nicole described the final years of the marriage as emotionally exhausting. There was no dramatic betrayal, no big blow-up, just something harder to explain: distance, neglect, and feeling alone even when someone else is sitting right next to you. Nicole built her life around the idea that love could fix anything, but over time, that belief became a heavy burden. The woman who once fought to save her husband from addiction was now fighting to save herself from emotional burnout. Insiders said the tension had been building for years. Keith's non-stop touring schedule, the pressure of fame, and the constant work it took to maintain sobriety all added up. Even though he worked hard to stay grounded, old cracks sometimes showed through. He wasn't mean, one friend reportedly said. He was just absent. Physically and emotionally. And for someone like Nicole, who'd spent her whole life being strong for everyone else, that kind of absence hurt more than harsh words ever could. Her world ran on structure, scripts, rehearsals, call times, red carpets. But her marriage felt unpredictable. When Keith was home, there were moments of love and laughter. When he wasn't, the silence stretched forever. Their life turned into a loop of distance and reunion, connection and withdrawal. Still, Nicole stayed. She stayed because she believed in second chances. She stayed because she saw the good in him, the same good that made her fall in love in the first place. But year after year, the truth became harder to ignore. The woman who once saved him was now losing herself trying to keep him together. After the divorce, reports surfaced that friends had gently encouraged her to step back long before things hit the breaking point. But Nicole, loyal to her core, refused. She thought leaving meant failing, one insider said. She'd already been through one high-profile divorce. She didn't want to do that again. Eventually, though, she realized staying silent was its own kind of failure, one that was stealing her peace, her creativity, and her sense of self. People who worked with her on The Undoing and Expats noticed small changes, deeper emotion on screen, more quiet reflection between takes, and an intensity that felt deeply personal. It was like she was acting out everything she couldn't say, turning her pain into art. And while she never publicly spoke about the details of her marriage's collapse, her interviews slowly started sounding more real, more raw, like she'd dropped the filter. When people asked her about love, she'd say stuff like, "Sometimes people grow in different directions," or, "You learn that peace isn't found in holding on, but in letting go." Soft words, sure, but they hit hard. They said a lot without saying too much. There were also whispers, never confirmed, never totally shut down either, that Keith's battle with sobriety may have crept back in over the years. Friends said he was trying, really trying, but let's be real, the emotional weight on both of them was heavy. Nicole gave it her all, her patience, her loyalty, her faith, the whole 9 yards. But even love has a breaking point when it starts feeling one-sided. So her revelation wasn't messy. It wasn't scandalous. It was way more human than that. It was the realization that loving someone doesn't always mean saving them, and sometimes the bravest, hardest move is knowing when to walk away. People close to Nicole say she left with grace. No yelling. No payback. No bitterness. Just quiet acceptance. She walked into that marriage believing in forever, and she walked out wiser, softer, and more at peace. The world had already seen her strength in her performances, her awards, her calm confidence, but this was a whole different kind of strength. The kind that comes from letting go of the life you thought you were supposed to have, just to make room for the one you actually deserve. And as her silence stretched on, fans started to get it. Maybe the real revelation wasn't about Keith Urban's darkness, maybe it was about Nicole Kidman's light. Because while he was fighting to stay grounded, she was learning how to rise again. And that quiet shift would soon become the most defining chapter of her story. Quick reminder, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what comes next, because what unfolds after this moment changes everything. 9. Keith's perspective, redemption and regret. While headlines framed Nicole Kidman's next chapter as renewal and rebirth, Keith Urban's road after the separation looked very different. It was quieter. He didn't clap back. He didn't spill tea in interviews. He didn't deny what went down. Instead, he did what he's always done when words fail, he turned to music. For Keith, the stage was never just a stage. It was therapy, confession, and redemption rolled into one. And after nearly 2 decades of marriage came to an end, his performances carried a whole new weight. Fans who caught his shows in late 2024 felt it immediately. The same guy who once bounced around the stage with his guitar now played slower, more intentional sets. His voice cracked in places it never had before, and his lyrics, already emotional, started sounding like messages meant for someone who wasn't listening anymore. Then came the moment that broke the internet. During one show, Keith quietly switched up a lyric in his longtime hit, The Fighter. Instead of the original romantic line that once symbolized his devotion to Nicole, he reworked it to reference his touring guitarist, Maggie Bohr. The crowd caught it instantly, and within hours, the clip was everywhere. According to People, October 2025, it happened during his Las Vegas residency, and fans immediately started speculating. Was it just a fun on-stage remix, or was it something deeper? A sign of how much his life had shifted since the separation. People confirmed that Maggie Bohr shared the clip herself, hyped about performing alongside Keith. Still, fans went back and forth, debating whether it was harmless, or a quiet goodbye to the love that once inspired the song. At another show, some fans swear they heard Keith whisper Nicole's name under his breath during a love song from early in his career. Maybe it was imagination. Maybe it was memory. Either way, it felt like heartbreak turning into music. Keith had never pretended to be perfect. Long before the fame, he talked openly about addiction, loneliness, and self-doubt. During his years with Nicole, he often called her his saving grace. And now, without her, that grace felt gone. People close to him described a man stuck between gratitude and guilt, thankful for what they had, but haunted by how much he may have taken it for granted. For Keith, the road had always been both a blessing and a curse. Music saved him, but it also pulled him away, from home, from stability, from the people who loved him most. Even in the happiest years of his marriage, constant touring made real connection tough. It's hard to stay grounded when your life plays out on a different stage every night, one former bandmate said. After the divorce was finalized, Keith faced something he hadn't felt in years, silence. And in that silence, he started healing. Not by pretending everything was fine, but by owning it. At one show, he spoke briefly to the crowd, saying, "Sometimes life breaks you just enough to remind you that you're still human." It wasn't a straight-up apology, but man, it felt like one. Fans who followed him forever knew he meant it. He was speaking from a heart that loved deeply, lost painfully, and was still figuring out how to forgive itself. That growth showed up in his music too. Insiders say his upcoming album dives into themes of redemption, forgiveness, and self-awareness. One producer described the tracks as raw and honest, like someone finally admitting they are not the hero or the villain, just a person trying to do better. No ego. No illusions. Just real emotion, laid bare. Still, the personal cost lingered. Friends noticed he was quieter, still smiling, but slower, more thoughtful. He reportedly spends more time in Nashville now, away from Hollywood's spotlight, choosing smaller venues and intimate shows over massive arenas. Some call it humility. Others call it healing. Honestly, it's probably both. What's clear is this: Keith Urban's story after Nicole isn't about resentment, it's about growth. He's never spoken badly about her, even when pushed for answers. Instead, he's praised her talent, her strength, and the impact she had on his life. In one interview, when asked if he had regrets, he paused and said softly, "Regret? No. You can't regret love. You just learn from it." That line stuck with millions because it nailed who Keith really is, a man who's messed up, fallen hard, stood back up, and still believes in love, even when it hurts like hell. For Keith, the end of his marriage wasn't the end of the story. It was a wake-up call about what love really asks for, honesty, presence, and vulnerability. Sometimes loving someone means letting them go so they can find peace, even if it leaves you alone. Behind the music, the fame, and the headlines, Keith's journey looks a lot like everyone else's who's loved deeply and lost quietly. The difference? He turned that heartbreak into harmony, giving the world songs filled with regret, growth, and redemption. Because at the end of the day, Keith Urban's truth is simple: he loved her, not perfectly, not forever, but sincerely. And sometimes, sincerity is all love can offer. Now, with the spotlight dimmer and his heart quieter, Keith keeps playing, not for applause, not for headlines, but for peace. And with every note, he's not just grieving what he lost, he's honoring what he had. For Keith Urban, love was never a mistake. It was the melody that made all the pain worth surviving, worth breathing through, worth living with. 10. Nicole's rebirth, stronger than before. When the final chapter of her marriage closed, Nicole Kidman did what she's always done best: she evolved. Not overnight, not through some shiny PR-crafted comeback, but through something real, quiet, unshakable resilience. She didn't drop a statement, didn't sit down for a dramatic tell-all, and didn't feed the tabloids that were starving for details. Instead, she chose silence, the same silence that once felt suffocating, and flipped it into power. That's boss energy. In the months after the divorce, Nicole dove headfirst back into her art. Acting has always been her safe space, the place where she can pour every unsaid feeling into a role and come out a little lighter on the other side. People who worked with her during that time noticed something different, a new fire. It was vulnerability mixed with straight-up defiance, and it gave her performances a raw, haunting truth. Her role in Expats was called Achingly Human, and her next project, still untitled, is already being labeled the most personal work of her entire career. Colleagues say she showed up on set early, locked in, respectful, but once the cameras rolled, something wild happened. You could feel the depth of her pain and her power, one director said. It was like she wasn't acting, she was purging. That's classic Nicole Kidman. She doesn't run from her scars, she repurposes them. Every heartbreak becomes art. Every silence turns into a story. Behind the scenes, her personal life started shifting too. She spent more time in Los Angeles, closer to her daughters and her sister Antonia. Friends noticed she smiled more, not the polished, red carpet smile, but the real one. She took long walks, hosted low-key dinners, and reconnected with the parts of herself that had been buried under years of caretaking and compromise. She's lighter, one close friend told People. Not because she's happy about what happened, but because she's finally free from pretending everything's fine. And yeah, that kind of freedom hits different. For nearly 2 decades, Nicole's identity had been deeply tied to being a wife, first to Tom Cruise, then to Keith Urban. Both relationships played out under the brutal microscope of fame, and both ended with Nicole choosing peace over performance. But this time, she wasn't running from love or fame, she was reclaiming herself inside them. Her interviews showed that shift. No bitterness. Just clarity. You can love someone and still know it's time to move on, she said during one quiet reflection. Peace doesn't always come from holding on, sometimes it comes from letting go with grace. That line went viral fast, shared by fans who felt seen by her words. What made Nicole's rebirth so powerful wasn't just that she survived another heartbreak, it's that she didn't lose her empathy in the process. In an industry that thrives on rivalry and revenge, she chose softness. Instead of obsessing over what broke her, she focused on what still worked: her family, her craft, her purpose. Her daughters, Faith and Sunday, became her anchor. Nicole has always said motherhood grounded her more than fame ever could, and now that truth hit even deeper. She protected their privacy, kept their lives out of the spotlight, and built a sense of normalcy despite the global attention. Success wasn't about trophies anymore, it was about being present, calm, and genuinely content. Professionally, Hollywood noticed. Offers flooded in, not just because of her talent, but because of her story. Nicole Kidman once again became a symbol of endurance, not loud, not flashy, but quietly undeniable. Proof that dignity speaks louder than drama. Her roles began reflecting that same grace: women who break but don't shatter, who bend but never lose their shape. Nicole's rebirth mirrors the rhythm of her life. Every loss becomes legacy. From the heartbreak of her first divorce to the silent unraveling of her second, she's never stopped growing, never stopped believing in love, even when love burned her. Because at her core, Nicole Kidman isn't a victim of her story, she's the narrator. And her story isn't about tragedy. It's about transformation. This new chapter isn't about who she lost, it's about who she found. The woman who once searched for stability in others now stands on her own, radiant and unguarded. She doesn't need to prove her worth to Hollywood, the public, or even herself anymore. As one critic wrote, Nicole Kidman has entered her renaissance, not because she reinvented herself, but because she's finally showing us who she's always been. And honestly, that's the hardest kind of comeback, the one that doesn't beg for applause, just quiet respect. Because Nicole Kidman didn't just survive the end of love. She turned it into the beginning of something way bigger: peace. 11. Their legacy, love that left a mark. Even though Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban's love story ended, its impact didn't disappear. It lives on, not just in the hearts of fans who believed in their fairy tale, but in Hollywood culture itself. They were never loud or messy. No constant drama, no scandal chasing. Their relationship was built on authenticity, vulnerability, and the belief that love could survive under insane pressure. And even though that promise cracked, its echo still lingers. To really get their legacy, you have to understand how rare they were. In a world where celebrity relationships burn fast and crash even faster, Nicole and Keith lasted nearly 2 decades. They showed that marriage, even between two megastars, could be built on patience, forgiveness, and actual effort. It wasn't perfect. It never pretended to be. But it was real. And for a long time, that was enough. Their dynamic was all about contrast. Nicole, poised, thoughtful, deeply emotional in her storytelling. Keith, raw, passionate, creating music from pain and redemption. Calm and chaos. Elegance and edge. Two worlds that should have clashed, but somehow made magic together. They represented balance, the actress and the musician building a grounded life despite insane fame. They avoided public meltdowns and non-stop headlines. When Keith entered rehab early in their marriage, Nicole didn't step back to save face, she stood right there with him. That moment, splashed across global headlines, became a rare show of real humanity in Hollywood. It proved that real love takes courage. Even after it ended, that courage stayed. No public takedowns. No lawsuits. No messy interviews. Just silence. And that silence said everything. Sometimes, respect is the final act of love. Nicole's legacy from that chapter is quiet strength. She showed millions of women that you can be strong and soft at the same time, that standing by someone doesn't mean losing yourself, and walking away doesn't mean you failed. Her grace through very public heartbreak made her a symbol of resilience, not loud, not aggressive, but deeply dignified. Keith's legacy is just as powerful. Through his music, he turned pain into something universal. Songs written during their marriage, and even after, are filled with gratitude, regret, and honesty. He never hid his flaws or denied how much love helped save him. That kind of transparency has inspired millions battling addiction, loneliness, and regret. He didn't hide behind fame, he used his scars to connect, to heal, to remind people that even stars stumble, and still get back up. They didn't just share moments, they built something that actually meant something, a family. Their 2 daughters became the real anchor of their story, the glue that softened both Nicole and Keith, helped them lay their pasts to rest, and taught them how to exist in the same space even after going their separate ways. People close to them have said that while their communication today is more low-key, it's still genuinely warm when it comes to raising their kids. Whatever went wrong between them as partners, they stayed solid as parents, and honestly, that quiet loyalty to family might be the strongest thing they ever built together. Outside of their personal lives, their story dropped a pretty powerful truth about love itself, that love doesn't automatically fail just because it ends. Sometimes love does exactly what it's supposed to do. It teaches, it shapes, it heals, and then it changes form. It turns into respect, gratitude, or even simple understanding. Nicole and Keith's love didn't fall apart, it leveled up. It showed them who they really were when the cameras shut off, when the lights dimmed, and when nothing was left but raw honesty. And that might be why fans still hold their story close. Because unlike so many celebrity relationships, theirs wasn't fueled by mess or scandal, it was rooted in realness. Even in heartbreak, there was beauty. Even in silence, there was grace. Years from now, when people look back on Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban, they won't just remember a marriage that ended, they'll remember a love that mattered. A love that argued, forgave, stumbled, and still chose kindness at the finish line. Because the true legacy of Nicole and Keith isn't the fairy tale they once lived, it's the humanity they showed when that fairy tale cracked. Their story reminds us that not every great love is meant to last forever. But if it leaves you stronger, wiser, and more compassionate than before, then maybe, just maybe, it did exactly what it was meant to do. Closing thoughts, what their story teaches us. Every love story leaves behind a lesson, and Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban's is no different. This wasn't a tale about flashy gestures or picture-perfect romance, it was about being human. Two people, both talented and broken in their own ways, came together hoping love would fill the gaps. And for nearly 2 decades, it did. But with time, that same love didn't just highlight what connected them, it also exposed what pulled them apart. Their journey shows us that love, no matter how magical it looks, isn't bulletproof. It needs more than sparks and promises, it needs timing, patience, understanding, and sometimes space. Nicole and Keith had the chemistry. They had the commitment. But life had other ideas. Fame, non-stop travel, pressure, personal struggles, all those things that look small from the outside slowly turned into walls between them. And when love shifted from comfort to constant effort, they made the hardest, and most honest, decision, to let each other go. There's something deeply real about that. In a world where endings get labeled as failures, their story proves that some endings are actually transformations. Nicole didn't walk away broken, she walked away reintroduced to herself. Keith didn't lose her, he found himself in the echoes of what they once were. Together, they showed that you can love hard, lose softly, and still honor what mattered. Their silence after the divorce spoke louder than any headline ever could. It wasn't bitter silence, it was the silence of understanding. Of two people choosing peace over ego, and respect over resentment. That kind of maturity is rare, especially under a spotlight, and that's exactly why their story still hits long after the noise faded. For Nicole, this chapter became the beginning of something radiant. She isn't defined by heartbreak, but by growth, every challenge sharpening her into the woman the world sees today, grounded, wise, effortlessly graceful. Her performances feel heavier now, more real, because she's lived through fire to find that calm. And for Keith, his music became his confession, his mirror, his redemption, proof that even lost love can still create something beautiful. What they shared didn't last forever, but it left behind something even deeper, empathy. They showed the world that love isn't about winning or losing, it's about evolving. About giving everything you have, learning from the pain, and carrying those lessons into the next sunrise. There's a quiet kind of beauty in watching two souls grow apart without tearing each other down. Nicole found strength in solitude. Keith found healing in humility. And maybe that's the real takeaway, that the end of love doesn't mean the end of life. Sometimes, it's the beginning of becoming who you were always meant to be. In the end, Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban's story isn't a tragedy. It's a reminder that love can be both temporary and timeless, short in years, but forever in impact. Even broken love can leave behind light. Because the truth is, they didn't fail each other. They finished each other's chapters. And as the curtain closes on this love story, one thing is undeniable: they may have walked different roads, but both came out stronger, softer, and changed for good. So what do you think about Nicole and Keith's journey? Do you think love like theirs could have survived if fate played it differently? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more real Hollywood stories that show the heart behind the headlines.